So you remember when China brokered a deal? This was they restored relations between Saudi Arabia and Iran, and that just happened. This is from March 11th, and this signals a temporary reordering of the usual allies and rivalries, with Washington left on the sidelines. So this is the stuff that they said was going to happen when Donald Trump became president, but it didn't. It's happening now when Joe Biden is president, and he's trying to start wars with two major superpowers. And so now, so that was March 11th. Now this is new. Saudi Arabia and Syria. So before it was Saudi Arabia and Iran. Now it's Saudi Arabia and Syria, close to resuming ties, and in a Russia brokered talks. So China's the peacemaker between Iran and Saudi Arabia, and now Russia's the peacemaker between Saudi Arabia and Syria.
Those are acts of war.
And peace is an act of war if you're in the United States, that's for sure. So Saudi Arabia and Syria are nearing an agreement to restore diplomatic ties after negotiations mediated by Russia. Talks were continuing after rounds of discussions in Moscow and Riyadh in recent weeks. If a deal is reached, it would mark an important step to reintegrating Syria and its leader Bashar al-Assad into the broader region after a brutal civil war. For Mr. Assad, a deal with Saudi Arabia would be one of the final demonstrations that he prevailed in a grinding 11-year civil war. I would call it a CIA-backed proxy war, not just against the rebels, but also against an array of foreign actors, including, well, they do say it, the United States, Saudi Arabia, who called for his removal from power. This is from the Wall Street Journal. Following the Chinese brokered deal between Saudi Arabia and Iran on resuming ties this month, the emerging Damascus-Riyadh rapprochement, I like that word, rapprochement, if it sticks, would leave the United States on the sidelines again in another major Middle East development. Saudi and Syrian officials said negotiators are aiming to conclude a deal before a potential visit by Saudi Foreign Minister Faisal bin Farhan to Damascus after the Muslim holiday of, I can't say that. The Russian government brokered a preliminary agreement when Mr. Assad visited Moscow last week, said officials from Saudi Arabia, Syria, and other Arab countries involved. Senior Syrian officials then visited Saudi Arabia in recent weeks. See, they're being nice to each other. If a formal agreement is reached, a vote on reintegration of Syria into the broader region and its reconstruction will be on the agenda of the next Arab League summit expected in May in Saudi Arabia. So that's a big deal. The Middle East has undergone a dramatic realignment in recent years. The Saudis patched up a diplomatic spat with Qatar. Persian Gulf countries have begun setting aside longstanding differences with Turkey, and conflicts in Libya, Yemen, and Syria have largely cooled down. This is not good for the United States and Israel. The United States remains engaged in trying to broker a normalization between Israel and Saudi Arabia. Oh, really? But there are high hurdles, I bet. After the Saudi-Iran pact and now a prospective rapprochement, there it is, between Syria and the kingdom, the U.S. is increasingly diplomatically sidelined. Middle East nations are making peace without Washington, D.C., and that is not good. Mr. Assad used a devastating earthquake in his country's north last month to make a push for normal diplomatic relations, visiting Oman and the United Arab Emirates in recent weeks, but he remains a pariah in most of the world, with overwhelming evidence that he used chemical weapons on Syrians. And so they're still, that's very important to them, because they want to isolate him, just like they're trying to isolate Putin. But it's not, it's all falling apart. When I say they, I mean the United States, the people running our foreign policy, which is the military-industrial complex and Wall Street. This is
Jimmy, what that is about is that, again, there are people in Washington and other powerful corridors who are such sadists towards Syria, who are so bitter that Syria managed to defeat the U.S. efforts to overthrow the government in a decade-long dirty war, the U.S.-led efforts, that they need to find a way to justify keeping these crippling sanctions on Syria even after a devastating earthquake. So the only way to do that is to paint the government as this demonic regime that used chemical weapons on its own people, because how can we possibly let this country import food and fuel when they're ruled by such horrible people who would gas their own people? So that's the purpose. That's the propaganda purpose of these chemical weapons allegations, and that's why they're still being made.
And do you think by pushing these allegations that other Middle East countries can easily see through? Do you think that
well, they know. I mean, again, Saudi Arabia funded Jaish al-Islam. Jaish al-Islam is the militia that controlled Duma at the time of the false flag in Duma. And I'm sure there are people in Saudi Arabia who know exactly what happened. So this kind of propaganda isn't aimed at them. This is aimed at U.S. audiences who have to be, there has to be consent manufactured for ongoing U.S. sanctions and military occupation in Syria.
So don't you think that when they push these ridiculous allegations like that you're debunking, the rest of the world sees through it, right? And even to the point where you said Brazil wants to have accountability over it, which is, don't you think that actually helps encourage efforts at diplomacy with Syria with the rest of the world? You know what I mean? When they see U.S. lying.
Yes. The only problem is so many people don't know about the OPCW Duma scandals because the media refuses to report on it. It refuses to acknowledge the existence of the OPCW dissenting inspectors who challenged the cover-up of their probe and the leaks that show all this. Like you try to find it in the New York Times or the Washington Post. The only time the New York Times has mentioned it was in passing at the bottom of an article about Bellingcat, this NATO troll farm. And they talked about the OPCW leaks as being an email from an investigator. And they talked about it in the most bland way. It was so ambiguous. So people just don't know about it. And you'll never see it covered on CNN or MSNBC. The only major, establishment platform that covers this story is Tucker Carlson, which has covered this a lot. Like I've been on a show to discuss it. So has Tulsi Gabbard. So has, I believe, Jonathan Steele, who is a British journalist, a veteran British journalist who's covered this. Otherwise, it's total censorship. My old show, Democracy Now!, they don't cover it. The one time they did, they brought on this journalist who has tried to whitewash the scandal and even doxed one of the whistleblowers. So that's even the progressive end of the media spectrum in the U.S. So it's bleak. But, look, there are ways to get it out. We're doing our best. The gray zone, you have too. And I do think that whenever people learn the facts of this story, that, I do think it has an impact. The Saudi Arabia, though, I mean, I'll just say about this, like, it's awkward because Saudi Arabia played a huge role in the dirty war. They spent billions of dollars at the behest of the CIA to arm sectarian death squads. There's even a leak from the Edward Snowden archives from the NSA showing that a Saudi prince, one of the crown princes, was directing rebels inside Syria, and his orders were light up Damascus. And what he was saying was, fire rockets at the Damascus airport. So Saudi Arabia was very, very involved in this war. By the way, funny note about that. The Intercept published that leak from the NSA, but they published it like years after they got it, years later. So they sat on it for a very long time. And if they had published it earlier, like when they actually got it, that could have had an impact maybe in helping people see the extent to which foreign countries were involved in this awful, dirty war in Syria. But anyway, too little, too late. But
what could possibly be a motive for a news outlet to sit on information like that?
Well, I don't know. We'll have to ask them. I mean, they've been terrible on the dirty war in Syria. And when it comes to the Duma scandal, they're another outlet that's refused to acknowledge the existence of the OPCW leaks and the whistleblowers, all while promoting the Trump administration narrative that Syria was guilty of a chemical attack in Duma. So that's our media in the U.S. right now. Even on the progressive adversarial side, you have people who refuse to report on the basic facts that undermine the pro-war narrative. That's just where we're at.
And what do you make of, the United States losing its influence like this? And that of course, it's not going to be covered the way it should in the United States, because the people who don't want you to know we're actually losing our influence, the thing that they tried to warn, said that what Trump was going to accomplish, is actually happening now, and they don't want you to know that. What do you make of that? What do you think the consequence?
America's back. America's back, Jimmy. I think that's what we're seeing is, look, how many tens of millions of people around the world live under U.S. sanctions, which the U.S. can do because it has such leverage over the financial system, which makes not only daily life difficult for average civilians, as these sanctions are intended to do. It just makes banking and commerce difficult because people have to constantly think about, if I engage in this transaction, am I possibly going to get my assets frozen by the U.S. and sued and sanctioned? So people are sick of it. It just doesn't, the world. It's leading to suffering around the world, and it's just difficult. So I think countries are becoming more aware of that and forming new alliances, and that's why we're seeing China and Russia growing closer. That's why we're seeing Iran and Saudi Arabia growing, having a rapprochement, as that article said. So I don't know. I mean, the U.S. still has military bases all around the world. Its corporations still control so much of the world's wealth. But I do think we're seeing a shift. And I think big part of that is the Biden administration is overseeing this disastrous proxy war in Ukraine, which has really hurt large parts of the world. Foremost Ukraine, obviously, but other parts too, because of the loss of, and like the impacts on the supply chain with food and fertilizer and all those things. So I think that's what we're seeing.
So how do you pronounce this word?
Rapprochement.
I did not know that.
I thought it was rapprochement.
I thought it was rapprochement, but
or I guess you can say approachment too. Yeah.
But Aaron,
I think it comes from
Canadian.
It comes from French. Yeah.
Yeah, and so you are more familiar with the French language, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, Aaron, thanks so much for stopping by to talk all things Syria with us. Everybody, check out Aaron's Substack, and you can find all the writing he's done that won himself this latest award, and which it's called he received the prestigious Izzy Award for Outstanding Achievement in Independent Media from the Ithaca College. More recently, in 2022, he got the Pierre Spray Journalism Prize, and that's for the writing he's done over at Gray Zone and over at his Substack. So check that out. It's mate.substack.com, right?
That's right.
Okay.
And thegrayzone.com.
And thegrayzone.com. All right, and everybody, Aaron, he's going to be sitting in guest hosting again coming up at the end of April. So everybody looks forward to that, right? Yay! Okay, pal. Well, I'll talk to you soon.
Talk to you soon, Jimmy. Good to see you.
Go to jimmydore.com to see my new stand-up special, COVID Lies Are Funny. For only $10, you get to become a premium member, too. And come see us do our live shows. We're going to be doing stand-up comedy in Milwaukee, Nashville, Honolulu, Los Angeles, Northampton, Massachusetts, Syracuse, New York, Cohoes, New York, Hartford, Connecticut, Baltimore, Maryland, and more. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for all those tickets.